everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Genre Equality Podcast on the Genre Equality channel. I'm Hidzir.
Isa.
We're here to talk about a lot of big titles here this week because um, movies are up and running again. All the blockbusters that have been backed up because of COVID are coming out, at a relentless pace.
Mhm.
And we're here to catch them all, particularly with one that we've been looking forward to for nearly 2 years now.
Yeah.
Is Denis Villeneuve's Dune saga, specifically part one, which is the first half of the first book. We'll also be talking about Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which
hmm
recently came out, the fifth season of My Hero Academia, which recently wrapped up, a new anime anthology focused on the Star Wars universe, very interesting,
Yeah.
Mike Flanagan's new miniseries called Midnight Mass,
hmm
as well as a few other small things. Well, not smaller. Why the Last Man is a very influential comic book. I'll be
Oh yeah.
talking a little bit about its adaptation, available now on FX and Disney Plus, along with Doom Patrol Season 3, James Wan's new film, Malignant,
hmm
the new Candyman, the new Adventure Time, the conclusion to Transformers War for Cybertron, animated series on Netflix. And finally, I'll be delving into Isaac Asimov's shared universe of novels, which include the Robot Empire and Foundation series, which all tie together
Yeah.
in amazing fashion. The reason I'm talking about that is because, of course, the Foundation TV series just kickstarted on Apple TV Plus. So I wanted to give you guys a little primer on that before you
Yep.
delve into the show, which I will be reviewing next month once I've seen more of it
hmm
to get a judgment. The
hmm
judgment isn't good as of now, but I'm giving it a chance first before
Yeah.
I make
Yeah.
my decision on it.
That's fair.
But one thing that is inspired by Isaac Asimov's Foundation series is the Dune books, which will be our first topic.
Yeah.
Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of Dune. Ever since Star Wars revolutionized mainstream science fiction cinema, I think filmmakers have flooded the genre with various iterations of the Joseph Campbell
hmm
hero's journey. Right.
Yep.
This repeatable structure is kind of known as the monomyth. It's practically a default style of sci-fi slash fantasy storytelling now. So commonplace that perceptive viewers can settle into a comfortable, complacent groove.
Yep.
What makes Frank Herbert's Dune so special is that it's not only the inspiration for Star Wars and all the space operas that come after,
hmm
but that its story is both a crystallization and a repudiation of the hero's journey. And what makes Denis Villeneuve's take on Frank Herbert's colossal masterwork so special is that it manages to take a familiar template, the galactic empire, warring houses, political intrigue, the chosen one, etc., etc. A template that was fresh in 1965 and yet not very fresh today.
Yeah.
And yet it manages to make it feel wholly unfamiliar and wondrous because this film's astounding scale, ambition, vision, and artistry
hmm
accomplishes that. It feels nothing like the boardroom blockbusters that are littering our cinematic landscape today. Villeneuve kind of grants extraordinary breathing room
Yeah.
in establishing the quest of Timothy Chalamet's Paul Atreides, who is the burgeoning leader of his aristocratic house, primed for the planetary governance of Arrakis, which is a land of sand and spice. 2.5 hours sail by, never once being weighed down by a large cast of characters
hmm
or a vast array of universe-specific details. It never handholds. It never settles down for
Oh yeah.
exposition. It just immerses you in the world's environment rather than bothering to explain them in clunky exposition. Um, this patience is not typically afforded by any other director working on the scale,
yeah.
with the exception of maybe Christopher Nolan.
hmm
Villeneuve grants his audience the time to take in the majesty of his brutalist futuristic architecture, the intricacy of the costuming, the complexity of the character reactions and relations, and the rapidly shifting political situations in the world of Arrakis. A it's a show don't tell kind of film at its peak, and that's especially welcome when everything on show is filmed so beautifully.
hmm
What are your takes on Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of Dune?
You're definitely right when you say that it doesn't do any hand holding.
Mm-hmm.
Despite being a huge fan of the books, and if you guys haven't checked it out, we did an entire episode of Behold
Yeah.
just going on and on about Dune and all its associated mediums and franchises.
Mhm.
But yeah, but it definitely doesn't do any of the hand holding. I think I found uh myself thinking a lot like how like new peeps who've never read the books have no idea what Dune is like. They see the poster, they see Chalamet, they see Zendaya, and they're just like, you know what, this looks pretty good. Let's go check that. I'm not really sure how it's necessarily possible for them to kind of get into it. But
Mm.
then again, I'm not. I can't be in their shoes, right? Like I come with the grand expectations of someone who's had this story live in his head for many
Mm.
years.
And also
Um,
grand knowledge that the casual audience doesn't have.
Yes, exactly, right? So like
Yeah.
on the one hand, I'm in a very in a different, I was about to say privileged position, but not really. I'm in a very different position because like what Villeneuve has to do for me here as a fan of the books and knowing it intimately is that he has to match or exceed my own head canon or
Mm.
head imagery
Mhm.
in order for that to kind of work. And I have to say, I was not disappointed.
Mhm.
I think if there was any director that um, is worth his salt and worth taking a shot at doing Dune, it would have been Villeneuve. So I was extremely excited when they
Mm.
announced it all the way back in 2017.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I've been hyped for this for about 4 years now.
Mhm.
But yeah, it doesn't disappoint. I think for many people who have read the books, well, if you've just read Dune itself and you're a fan of the first book, I
Mhm.
think there's plenty of here as a fan that for you to kind of dive into, for you to kind of like question your initial kind of impressions of that as you are reading versus what you were watching. There's a plenty over here for you to dissect with your friends who've also read the book,
Yeah.
or even with your friends who haven't read the book, right? Just to kind of like fill in the gaps, compare notes, debate about whether something worked or it didn't, get excited over. And like this movie in all of its nearly, is it 3 hours?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Almost three
yeah,
hours.
almost 3 hours runtime, like gives you kind of plenty of that. And the only thing I think is you got to keep in mind that this is only part one,
Mhm.
and there's no real way to have ended the film in um ex- in the kind of like typical climatic ending,
Yep.
especially for part one, which is understandable.
Mhm.
But yeah, that only makes me excited for part two, which
Yeah.
I really hope they green light soon because it seems to be doing much better than any other Villeneuve franchise so far.
Oh,
um
way better than
yeah.
expectations. If you are unfamiliar with the story, let me give you a brief synopsis. On the surface, the book tells a fairly simple story of a young man growing into a leader, shonen style, during a time of war. And like Frank Herbert, Villeneuve invests that tale with an almost mythic importance. A lot has been said about the complexity of Dune, a book whose impossibility to adapt is almost legendary, with a story so expensive and a mythology so sprawling, that even talented filmmakers like Jodorowsky, whose version never came to fruition, and
Hmm.
David Lynch, who disowned his 1984 take, stumbled in their attempts to capture it. Villeneuve gets it though. Most of it is in the astonishing production design, which very easily and clearly delineates every world and faction with its own visual identity. The cool, lush palette of House Atreides in
Mm,
Caladan is totally distinct from the gothic caverns of the Harkonnen homeworld, Gedi Prime, and
yeah.
a world away from the sizzling expanse of Arrakis. Villeneuve is a visionary filmmaker, and he lets his images do as much of the narrative heavy lifting as the dialogue. In
Hmm.
fact, even more so than the dialogue in some instances.
Yeah.
The way everything from the page is brought to life here is extraordinary. From the sandworms to the ornithopters to the still suits to the visceral portrayal of the Bene Gesserit voice,
Mm.
Dune evokes a nearly constant jaw on the floor awe from the small details and the big ones. The sense of scale conjured up is from moment to moment frequently astonishing. The camera work is largely wide and stately,
Mhm.
with lingering shots that let you kind of drink in all the detail of the gorgeous sets, and bask in the vistas of the galactic visions that Villeneuve is inspired by. In one particular shot that sticks in my head, the transport ships bound for Arrakis
Oh
are
yeah.
of like an ant-like significance against the deep expanse of space, but at
Mhm.
ground level, they are colossal. So that's a sense of scale that Villeneuve captures there. The visual vastness is also matched
Mhm.
by a great Hans Zimmer score. It is. I don't know what the technical term is, but in my opinion, this is full Zimmer with
Yeah.
um, howling human voices, the chattering drums, and a
Yeah.
whole host of alien sounds. The acting itself is also uniformly excellent, from
Mhm.
Oscar Isaac to Timothy Chalamet to Zendaya's very minor role as Shani, although she'll definitely have a much bigger one in the next film.
Yep.
If you go by the books, they may not exactly be who I imagined in my head, but the actors capture the spirit of the characters very well.
Yep.
Special mention must be given to, of course, Rebecca Ferguson as
Oh yes. Mhm.
Lady Jessica, as
Mhm.
she seals the movie in every scene. She can be graceful and vulnerable, but also frightening when she needs to be.
Yeah.
She embodies what kind of Bene Gesserit Lady Jessica is. And for the most part, the story is pretty faithful to, barring minor alterations that conflate scenes or shift some plot points here and there. Book readers may or may not nitpick at them, but I don't particularly mind,
Yep.
simply because I don't have any alternatives to offer that wouldn't severely affect the already very long pacing of it.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think. Yeah, without going to spoiler territory, like as far as the casting goes, it's spot on, right? Like
Hmm.
outstanding Rebecca Ferguson, outstanding, easily the best kind of casting choice that we've seen so far.
Yep.
Especially important, I think, for um I think for part one, right?
Yeah.
She doesn't get featured in part two, in the book anyway.
Hmm.
But here's the thing: like on a very personal level, like I never liked Lady Jessica as a character within the
Hmm.
books itself. I don't think she's particularly well written,
Hmm.
right? Like she falls off a lot. It's her powers are sometimes convenient,
Hmm.
but I feel like seeing it on screen and seeing like Ferguson's portrayal of it definitely like redeemed that character for me to a much other degree, because you kind of like, she fills up a lot of what's not in the book in a
Mm.
very believable and very human way, right?
Mm.
Which some is sometimes hard to do when you're reading a book about like teenage boys who are turning into gods lah, essentially.
Yep.
um yeah, so like shout out to that. I think like our boy Timmy really looks the part of Paul
Hmm.
Atreides. It'll be very interesting to see, just how he kind of ages with this saga, if it continues on for at
Hmm.
least another, two movies or whatever it is. Oscar
Mm.
Isaac's great. Josh Brolin is apparently Hollywood's understanding of ugly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like Patrick
Yeah.
Stewart,
I
right?
mean, like the casting, I think pretty much is yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Elder Skarsgård is a very
Hmm.
different vision of what I thought the Baron would be. But he
Mm.
plays it to a T in his own way, and it is equally like creepy.
Yeah, he
Um,
he takes a lot of out of Apocalypse Now and Marlon Brando,
yeah.
that particular vibe. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Bautista, we don't really see much of him.
Hmm.
But as I mean, he plays Beast Raban, right? Like he looks the part.
Hmm.
Zendaya looks beautiful in every scene that she's in. And barely has 5 words to say.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it's just a like very very solid cast overall, and I don't really have any like major complaints about that. I think Moa's casting as Duncan Idaho is kind of inspired. Not the
Mm.
character I saw in my head,
Hmm.
for sure, but it fits and it works. And I think like, I may have written him off because of a lot of other roles like Aquaman and stuff like that. And when they first announced him, I was like, ooh, that might not quite work. But yeah, it works. It's a very, very different Duncan Idaho,
Hmm.
but somehow they really really made it work. Like it's a very very unique character in and of itself, from I think what a lot of people imagine in their heads.
Definitely,
um
definitely.
yeah. I wish Bardem had a bit more here as Stilgar. I mean, obviously in part two, he's going to play a major, much more major role as most of
Yeah,
the Fremen cast.
yeah,
But it's incredible how much he does not look like Bardem.
mm, definitely.
Yeah, if you don't point it out to someone, it might be easy to kind of forget that.
Hmm.
Yeah. But all in all, casting is great. Story point wise, I have two major issues.
Sure.
Um, just because on the one hand, I understand why those things have to be made, and maybe if we go into a spoiler section, I'll talk a bit about that. But
Hmm.
like kind of two major sections which I thought to me are critical to the telling of the story, right? Like because of how and when they take place within the story, it
Hmm.
dramatically changes the way in which the rest of the story kind of pans out. Like it's a causality thing, right?
Mm.
Yeah, and then one of it is in the middle of the movie, and one of it is all the way at the end. Um, yeah, so it's understandable, I think, because not everything on the page transfers nicely onto the screen, right?
Hmm.
Like it's hard to do internal monologue without having like some character talking to you, a la Morgan Freeman,
Yeah.
and it's hard to have like it's hard to show prescient visions in a way that is both like visually stunning and impactful and doesn't take up like a good chunk of like 10-15 minutes, right? Because that's just not
Hmm.
tenable in a runtime even of 3 hours.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Definitely.
so I
Yeah.
do have some things that I am worried about how they will resolve that, because it's very clear because of the creative choices that were made for those points,
Hmm.
that they will either have to do makeup work for it in the second movie, which I feel might make it a bit clumsy, or
Hmm.
they will have to de-emphasize certain things within the law itself, which
Hmm.
is understandable because again, like you can't tackle everything within those 3 hours, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, but I'm gonna hold my judgment as to whether or not those were like you good choices,
Hmm.
or this whether or not they'll be good choices despite not being faithful to the book itself,
Yeah.
and how that will when part two comes out.
Definitely. This is obviously just the first part of the first book, the first half of the first book.
Yeah.
The part one subtitle tells you straight out that it's essentially half a story. And yet, because it's just half the story, it allows that half all the breathing room that it requires. And
Yeah.
even that, is still not enough to fit in most of the first half, a lot of the first half of the book.
Hmm.
There's some parts that are skipped. The majority of the complaints, though, surrounding the movie is that it feels like half a story, to which I say, like, no shit, lah.
Yeah.
Um, Dune feels most reminiscent to me of the Fellowship of the Ring.
Mm.
Uh, like Fellowship, it's merely the opening part of a story,
Yeah.
but manages to feel like a masterwork in its own right. Like Fellowship, it establishes a sprawling and complex world that feels both familiar and utterly new, with the lightest of touches. And like Fellowship, its biggest set piece comes just after the midway point, after 90 minutes of setting up dominoes,
Yeah.
and Villeneuve lets them clatter into one another in a spectacular style, scattering the characters to various locations to the winds as the final hour becomes, all out survival mode. But unlike Fellowship, there's no guarantee of a Two Towers next year.
Hmm.
So for now, we have more proof that Denis Villeneuve is a masterful filmmaker, and particularly in science fiction.
Yeah.
Obviously, you gotta pray to Shai Hulud that this does well at the box office, and we'll get a part two, because I think audiences deserve to see the conclusion to an action film so immaculately crafted and
Hmm.
patiently paced. And
Yeah.
I think the movie as a whole is artistically and intellectually dense in a way that there will be a barrier to casual audiences going
Yeah.
into this expecting a Star Wars type of action movie.
Hmm.
Perhaps the only legitimate major complaint that I'll accept for this film is that it is, I think, thoroughly unfriendly to newbies
Yeah.
and non-book readers, especially given how minimally Villeneuve dwells on the universe's terms, technology, religions, regions, politics, and ecology. But immense details of the book are either only quickly mentioned or have to be inferred, and so they may be
Yeah.
lost casual audience who are not paying attention. Like, for
Mhm.
example, that the Bene Gesserit has engineered not only Paul's biology, but also spent centuries cultivating the Freeman religion to pave the way for Paul's messianic rise. Like, that may be lost to an audience, or
Yeah.
Liet Keynes's philosophy on ecology,
Oh yeah.
um, not really touched upon. And fascinating things like that are too quickly glossed over, and perhaps could have used a little more telling and less showing. Um, but Villeneuve is like painting in this big, bold, thematic, and visual brushstrokes here.
Yeah.
It's preferring to immerse you in Dune rather than tell you about Dune. And if I had to go one way or the other, I would honestly prefer it to be this way overall, all things
Yeah.
considered.
Mhm.
Any final thoughts before you give your rating and we delve into the spoiler section?
Yeah. So okay, so if some of you are listening to this and you don't know what Dune is, or you've heard of Dune and you've never gone into it, I will say this, right? As challenging as it is to newbies, the
Mm,
beautiful thing about Dune is that you don't even need to read the first book to get all the information that you need,
yeah.
right? Because it's so well loved and so well researched and cataloged and archived that the Dune Wiki has everything that you need, right? You want to spend 4 hours doing that, actually, just going through and understanding what the terms are and all of that without actually reading a book itself. Go ahead and do that, right? We live in an age where that is considered acceptable. Uh,
Mm,
it it, this feels very much like walking into a museum, an art
mm,
museum, and seeing a massive kind of like beautiful, detailed, evocative mural that's there.
yep.
But you have absolutely no idea of who the artist might be, what the
Mm-hmm,
story behind it is about, and all of that. Uh, but the internet exists, and the internet
mm-hmm,
loves Dune, and all the information that you could ever imagine is present there, even before you dive into the book itself. And
mm,
that's what it feels like for me. It's not like dense for the sake of being dense, or esoteric for the sake of being esoteric. It's not some kind of hidden knowledge. It's not fucking Tenet, right? Where there's no
mm-hmm,
information about that whatsoever, about how that's going to happen, right? This
mm-hmm,
is a reproduction of, not a reproduction, but is an interpretation of something that's well loved and well worn
mm-hmm,
uh, over decades. So don't
mm,
be scared. Um, Stick it out for the ride,
mm-hmm,
and everything that you could possibly have questions for or want to know is readily available to you.
mm,
Is my encouragement. I just want to say this because, like, it's very easy for us to both come in here and, like, we've already spent like almost 2 hours talking about Dune, right, on
mm-hmm,
our last episode. Behold,
yep.
um, but yeah, if you're listening to this, you don't know what Dune is about, it's okay. But
Mm-hmm,
our recommendation here includes everyone, right? Like when we give this, an objective kind of like star rating, it's for the movie itself, and the fact that it's not going to be shut off for anyone who's not into or hasn't been into Dune or in sci-fi in general.
yeah, I mean, heck, even the original book comes with an appendix, so don't be shy about looking up the terms
Oh yeah.
because even Frank Herbert had to do that at the
Oh
end of his
yeah.
book. Yeah. Overall, I'll rate this a 7.5 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, it's 7.5 out of 10 for me.
Yeah.
Just it's a strong recommendation. I'm a big fan. It does mean a lot to me, and I'm very, very happy with the movie coming out.
Mm-hmm.
I am nitpicking for sure. I think, like, on a
Yes.
general, I mean, not just in terms of faithfulness and things like that. I do feel like there were portions in which, again, I don't know what this is about necessarily, but the dialogue can't be heard,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm only assisted by the fact that I know what is supposed to take place in a given scene from the books itself.
And you
Uh,
can read Chinese?
and I can read Chinese, right? Which is
Yeah.
the subtitles that I had.
Yeah.
There are portions that it is hard to hear. I am filling in the gaps from prior knowledge, and I
Mm-hmm.
have heard a lot of complaints from other people,
Mm-hmm.
that they struggle with that, right? And I'm not sure what the tendency for that has been in a lot
Mm.
of movies that I've liked in the last like 5 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And well, is it always Zimmer? No, it's not always Zimmer. Uh,
No.
yeah, I only thought, like, Nolan is a big, big perpetrator of that.
Mm-hmm.
With how he mixes his voices and his sounds.
Yep.
Yeah, but that's like one kind of like major thing. It really takes away in those moments from me trying to understand what's going on. I can only imagine if you're like new to this, and on top of that, you can't hear the dialogue, and the
Mm.
dialogue is so important to like even the throwaway lines are so important to like you latching on for more information later on. That
Mhm.
could be extremely frustrating.
Oh yeah, definitely. And that accounts for why it's only a 7.5 and not higher.
Yep.
To delve into more details about specific nitpicks or specific things that we loved, we're now going to go into the spoiler section. So beware, if you don't want spoilers, you can skip ahead to our Shang-Chi review up next. But we're going to delve into the spoiler section here right now. And Isa, who's read the book many times over many years,
Yep.
tell us, what were the scenes that were faithfully recreated, and on the flip side, what were you upset by that weren't included?
Okay. Um. Okay. The opening scene is something that we don't get in the books, or
Hmm.
in the book rather. It maybe they dealt with it
Hmm.
for House of Atreides. The Brian dealt with it for House of Atreides, but never got there. So
Yep.
I think that's important because it does set the stage and the tone for a lot of that. It's also a great opportunity to spend just kind of like this 10-15 minutes showing off, right? The tech that you don't see anywhere else, showing off Caladan,
Hmm.
showing off like the amazing spacesuits that very honestly, up to this point in time, never existed in my head as part of the
Yeah.
canon for Dune. Because like Herbert doesn't go into much detail for that. Like he describes still suits. He describes like some of the house armor and the colors and stuff like that, but like never that in its entirety.
Hmm.
You don't get any of the pomp and circumstance and bureaucracy of the empire necessarily until
Mm.
much later in the series, right? So you don't really
Mm.
get much of it in the first book. So being able to squeeze all of that in the opening is brilliant. That's fantastic. Yeah. Most of the stuff on Caladan has been great. I do think the Gom Jabbar scene
Mm.
was very faithful in terms
Hmm.
of like the way it was represented.
Yep.
Or the way in which it was told was very faithful. I'm not
Hmm.
sure if it necessarily fit the image in my mind, which is
Hmm.
something you're gonna hear a lot during this little rant.
Hmm.
Um Most importantly, and we discussed this, most importantly for me, the scene that needed to be done and they did was the rescue of the harvester.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, Hids and I we had a just after the movie we had like kind of like a discussion about that, and like that is so key, especially for a movie that can only show you one half of the story.
Hmm.
In establishing um who Leto Atreides is and why
Yeah.
the Atreides code is something that becomes important
Mm.
all throughout the entirety of Dune, right?
Particularly because Lito won't be in the second film, so this is your one chance to do it.
Yeah, it is one of those amazing moments that define a character
Hmm.
for the readers, and they managed to capture that very succinctly,
Yep.
very stunningly.
Hmm.
And I was not disappointed for that. For me, I think that might have been the key standout moment of the film.
Mm.
For sure, like that absolutely made sense. It was faithful. It got not just like the actual word of it, but the spirit of it as well. And yeah, Oscar Isaac acted the hell out of that. I loved it. Um,
Yeah.
that I think was definitely like one of the high points for me.
Hmm.
Just in like the meeting of, what that scene is in the books and what the scene is in the movie itself.
Hmm.
There's that the Fremen Desert Walk. I think is very cool.
Hmm.
Uh, but we don't really get to see the
Yep.
Fremens like do it like pro style necessarily. It's just
Yeah.
mostly Timmy and Jesse like
Yeah.
stumbling their way through, which is fine, which is totally understandable.
Hmm.
But Fremen combat, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Like Fremen desert combat, amazing. That is exactly what I was looking for. The tech in this world is strange and foreign and not really what I imagined to be, but we live in an age where CGI can do amazing things. The ornithopters are something like out of my wildest dreams, right? Like
Hmm.
way beyond what I could imagine it to be. Same
Hmm.
with the giant like spacecraft with the brutalist kind of like architecture in on Arrakis itself, yeah, amongst all the sand and all of that. Like it really, really looks the part, and I have no complaints about that. The two things that
Yeah.
I will rant about, or rather, I'm
Hmm.
going to take a moment just to point out two particular things, right? And
Go
maybe
ahead.
it's just me nitpicking. First and foremost, um, a couple of things. First and foremost, there is occasionally Villeneuve has decided that there will be these ghostly whispers, right?
Hmm.
They're supposed to be reminiscent of. I mean, for those of us who have read the book, we know that that's supposed to be like the echoes of Paul tapping into his prescient visions, and his role as the Kishwa Shadarak, right?
Hmm.
And those are the whispers of his past and all the genetic memory of every ancestor who has ever lived before him.
Hmm.
Uh, that is obviously something that can't be explained in the first half of the movie.
Hmm.
Is absent from the book
Hmm.
to begin with, and stands out as extremely puzzling, and
Hmm.
not in a good way. It's not like, ooh, that's a mystery. It feels very, very random. And
Hmm.
that kind of ties into the first major instance in which it diverts from the book that I have an issue with, which
Hmm.
is Paul's first prescient vision as he is in the still tent with Jessica,
Hmm.
with his mother, and he voices his prescient vision to his mother,
Hmm.
which is not what happens in the book, right? Like he has the vision, he experiences it, he feels it, he retorts to his mother and dresses her down,
Hmm.
and essentially marks the point in time when Paul is no longer a boy, right? He
Hmm.
has moved from being a boy to being a force of the cosmos,
Hmm.
and that dramatically changes what his character is like and how his character acts. Um, from being a boy who aspires to leadership and power to being a boy with power who occasionally lapses back into being a child, right?
Hmm.
I felt that having that vocalized to Jessica didn't make sense
Hmm.
to me, and it also like um, diminishes a
Hmm.
great deal of the mystery for some of Paul's actions later on.
Hmm.
Obviously, Villeneuve has the opportunity to cut out scenes in which characters are wondering why Paul is doing what he's doing.
Yep.
But it is just as a whole, law wise, problematic because Jessica isn't supposed to know what's going on with her son. Like, she's not supposed to understand the inner workings of that. She understands it because she's Bene Gesserit, because she
Hmm.
understands what the concept of the Kiswa Haderach is. But
Hmm.
he doesn't know who her son is anymore from that point onwards, right? And that's like a big part of the plot moving into part two.
Hmm.
Him vocalizing it changes that.
Hmm.
Um, in addition to that, the fact that in the book he speaks of his mother's pregnancy in the
Hmm.
tent, whereas
Hmm.
we got that brought forward in the movie by a fair bit.
Hmm.
Which is uh, yeah. I mean, like again, it felt like that particular moment was diluted. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, it was diluted in the movie itself. So that's like my one kind of major complaint. Again, I understand it's hard to do internal monologue for a movie without
Hmm.
like taking a lot of time to do it, boring the audience, and so on and so forth. But
Hmm.
to have it vocalized in very clearly vocalized was just
Hmm.
like, I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
My second portion comes at the end of the movie, and I think like this might be the biggest one for me.
Mm-hmm.
Is that his fight with
Jamis.
Jamis takes
Yeah.
place before they reach the siege,
Yep.
and that is really problematic for me, right?
Mm.
Because that is his initiation into Fremen society, for which
Mm-hmm.
he will become the leader of, right?
Mm.
And the biggest part about it is not so much that how it took place or how the fight on it is where it takes place and who sees what happens,
Yeah.
right? The whole idea that first of all that you would endanger your still suit in the open desert
Mm.
in the day
Mm-hmm.
for a battle like this is just a complete misunderstanding or ignoring like what Fremen culture is about, right?
Mhm.
Like water is precious, steel suits are precious. You want to fight, you fight at night. You want to fight, you
Mhm.
fight indoors. You want to fight with your Chris knives, don't wear your fucking suit, right?
Mm.
So all of those things problematic for me. But the worst
Yep.
thing is that the most important part and the defining characteristic of who Paul Muad'Dib is to the Fremen is the fact that in his initiation, in the very first moment of him becoming
Mhm.
Fremen, he gave water to the dead. And we
Yeah.
don't get any of that here, right? And like the people who are there in the movie to witness this fight,
Mhm.
outside of Chani, no one sees him give water to the dead.
Mhm.
And that to me is an atrocity.
Mm.
That you is gonna take a lot of work, I feel, to make
Mhm.
up for.
Mm.
Considering that we are going into the siege in part two,
Mhm.
there needs to be um maybe in general, because there isn't time for us to understand in the movie that the myth of Paul is massive
Mhm.
before he even touches his feet even touch Dune. I'll get
Mhm.
even before he lands on Arrakis itself. Like we don't
Yeah.
have enough time to delve into that, or the mission protectiva and how
Yeah.
they've set up everything. Like there's no time for that. I understand, that's fine, right? But it is diminished to the point where uh especially because of the fight being moved forward, I don't yeah, that didn't sit well with me, essentially, is what I'm saying, right? Because it's
Mm.
problematic. It really is problematic because it's a major part of that. Like it is a defining character moment for Paul, much
Mm.
in the same way that the Harvester Rescue is a defining character moment for Leto.
Mhm.
And yeah, and I I don't understand why they could not have just simply crossed over to the siege and had
Mhm.
the fight
Mm.
first before ending the movie.
Yep.
Yeah, that was my main thing, because you end on a high in that manner, right? Like you go
Mhm.
there, there's a climatic fight, right? You've given Jamis enough time to fucking stew over his slight, right? Then it makes more sense, and it's not like, oh, I just met this child and I want to kick his ass. Like it that like didn't sit well with me, you know.
Yep.
Get to the siege, get to siege Taba. You don't have to establish the whole Fremen culture. Jamis, you can still move the fight forwards. Jamis throws down. You do the whole ritualistic thing. You end it with the fact that he gives water to the dead, and the
Mhm.
Fremen know it, and then you end the
Mm.
movie there.
Mhm.
And or you might even go up to the point where um an equally important point, right? But you to the point where he gives Chani the water rings,
Mm.
and then you end it there. Then that sets up um part two, which is supposedly, according to Denny,
Mm.
going to be told from Chinese point of view,
Mhm.
right? Because at this point in time, like Chinese, a pretty face in his vision. There's no establishing of any sort of like relational quality there so far.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm
Yep.
done with my
I
rant.
mean, at
Those like
least
those
that
two
part
major
is
major things for me. I
yeah.
feel.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, like the whole Chinese not having a character yet is pretty much part of the book, but the rest of it is, you're right. It's absolutely right, lah.
Yeah.
It's quite missed opportunities, lah, shall we say?
Yep.
Not that what was done was all that bad, to be honest, but they were just like certain opportunities for improvement.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that's where the criticisms come from, lah. I mean, likewise, like there are certain things that are cut out that I don't mind at all. Lady Jessica being framed is one of those kind of silly subplots that Tufi Howard should have seen through, and I didn't like about the book.
Yep.
And that part was cut out. I mean, sure, we don't get drunken Duncan, but I could do without that.
Yeah.
The dinner scene that introduces the politics of
Oh man.
Arrakis,
Yeah. So important.
um, missed opportunity as well. But
Mhm. Again,
in the grand scheme of things, it's okay. I can let that go.
agreed.
One big one that you haven't already mentioned. You mentioned all the biggest ones, really. Like one big
Yep.
one that you haven't already mentioned is the conditioning of imperial doctors, in
Oh
particular
yeah.
with with regards to Dr. Yue's betrayal
Hmm.
and why no one saw it coming.
Yep.
Without explaining the conditioning of the doctors, you kind of diminish the shockingness of the betrayal
Yes.
of Dr. Yue.
Yep.
And that I feel is another missed opportunity. Lah. So like
Yeah. For sure.
those are the points, the
Yeah.
spoilery points that we have issues with. Yeah.
Um. Yeah. Okay. Let's just go into that a little bit, right? Like USB
Mm,
betrayal and the fact that he's a Sook doctor who has imperial conditioning. By right, he
mhm.
can't, like, he physically is supposed to be unable to betray the master to whom he's sworn. This is
Yeah.
specifically for those of you who somehow managed to wander into the spoiler area. Maybe you've seen the movie, but
Yeah.
haven't done your research and haven't really gotten time to dive into that.
Mhm.
That is so important because that explains why Tufir, and I'll get to Mentats in a minute, why
Mhm.
Tufir completely disregards the fact that he could be a traitor
Mhm.
within his calculations as one of the greatest mentats is alive, supposedly.
Mhm. Yep.
Um, that completely negates the possibility of Yue being the one who betrays the house.
Yeah.
And that is of course not dealt with at all because the mentats in the movie are, toys,
Yep.
essentially.
Yep.
With understandable, like I think, like what you said for in our last Behold episode, right? Like mentats tend to be gimmicky and plot devices. They're as smart as they need to be, they're as stupid as they need to be, and maybe that's something that Danny realized, especially for the first book.
Yeah.
um you know uh yeah, and we don't get like a truly powerful full-blown
Yep.
mentor until Paul comes into his ascendancy, or until
Mhm.
much later in the series where your favorite mentor pops up,
Mhm.
your mentor general pops up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, like the mentats here, I do like the fact that there is a visual representation for them doing their math. That is
Mhm.
cool. That is cool.
Mhm.
You only see it once, and it is literally, no pun intended, blink and you
Mhm.
will miss it.
Yep.
Um, so that's one. Yeah, the casting for Tufia,
Mhm.
but Polka Dot Man as
Mhm.
Peter DeVries,
Yep.
brilliant, like brilliant. So sad, did not get to see him be absolutely creepy
Mhm.
before he died, which was like it's such an early death, but it was so satisfying in the book because he's just a
Mhm.
creep, like
Yeah.
to the nth degree. Also, I feel like a bit of a missed opportunity there, but you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's that. Oh, okay. One more thing that actually kind of recently came out in one of my discussions
Okay.
with some of our other friends is that they felt that the Baron is more evil here than
Mhm.
he is the master manipulator that we get to see in the books.
Mm.
And it is purely because there's one round table scene in House Harkonnen that he displays that
Mhm.
he shows his relationship with Beast Raban and why Beast treats, Arrakis the way that he does.
Mhm.
His relationship with Fade Raoud, uh,
Yep.
and his relationship with Peter.
Yeah.
Like all those things in that one scene, man, that would have added so much. It really, really would. Like you go from understanding him to be the disgusting, grotesque man who you get the sense like he's evil at his core, but he's not necessarily brilliant.
Mhm.
We don't get any of that because we're missing that particular scene, right? And I have
Mm.
to agree with that sentiment. That unfortunately, because you have to cut things out, you get a very different Baron because
Mhm.
of that. And we are not going to be able, as far as I can tell, in part two, to be able to see that either.
Mhm.
Because the story it shifts almost entirely away from House Harkonnen
Yeah.
until the very end. But yeah, so that's just like another kind of complaint. I think it still works. Like what
Mhm.
the Elder Skarsgård has done, sure.
Mhm.
The visual effect of it, the fucking floating with the long ass like gown, fuck, that is creepy as hell.
Mhm.
Less comical, far less comical than what was in my head. Like I think when I was young and the first time I was reading Dune, in my head he was like a really, really exaggerated Doctor Robotnik.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
This is
I
far,
see that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I see this as far more terrifying for sure.
Mhm.
But not like that
Yeah,
kind of evil doesn't feel as dangerous as an evil that can scheme, with
yeah,
the best of
definitely,
them. Yeah. Okay.
definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I'm done complaining.
Yeah, that wraps up the spoiler section of Dune. If you have obviously seen the film, listen to the spoiler section. We do totally understand that like as a filmmaker, it's very difficult to
Oh yeah.
include the scenes that we want to or expand on the scenes that we want to without bloating the film to a 3.5 hour or 4 hour quote unquote Snyder cut. That being said, like obviously I would love to see a 4 hour cut of this, and apparently that exists. So if there's anything, I would love to see the Villeneuve cut of this. And it just goes to show that I think like Dune is probably more well serviced as a mini series or as a series than a film. But that being said, the way that Denis Villeneuve did this film was probably the best screen adaptation of Dune I've ever seen. Next up, we move on from the WB to Marvel by talking about Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten
Oh
Rings.
yeah.
After the Black Widow streaming controversy, Marvel Studios returns to the big screen to introduce MCU's first Asian American superhero in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Not only is it a belated triumph for Asian superhero representation, it's also notable because the MCU finally delivers on a group introduced way back in Iron Man 1.
Mhm.
The organization that first kidnapped Tony Stark was the Ten Rings, and it also does justice to the beloved villain Mandarin after the amusing but divisive fake out in Iron Man 3. Directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, the film stars Kim Convenience actor Simu Liu as the titular martial arts master. When we first meet him, he's a Chinese American millennial slacker
Yep.
working as a parking valet alongside his best friend Katie, played by Aquafina. But when his 1,000-year-old crime boss dad, Wen Wu, aka the Mandarin, comes looking for him, Shang-Chi is forced to confront his family's hidden legacy and hidden traumas to become this kick ass martial arts hero and stop his dad from inadvertently destroying the world via his magical 10 rings. Um, Now the movie begins with what I feel is one of the strongest first acts I've ever seen in an MCU movie. The slacker BFF chemistry between Simu Liu and Aquafina is instantly endearing and winsome. They are comedy gold together. The fight scenes are stunning, beginning with a graceful wuxia battle in the forest to a phenomenally choreographed fight scene on a bus that is reminiscent of early Jackie Chan. Truly, the bus fight is easily the best scene in the film. It's incredible. Forget all the Disney Plus shows, forget Black Widow. This fucking bus fight between Shang-Chi and a group of assassins is hands down the best scene the MCU has ever produced
Oh
in
yeah.
2021, and it will forever rank up there as one of the MCU's best fights ever. Um, Plus, we get to see Wong Kar Wai Faith, Tony Leung steal the whole goddamn movie as the Mandarin. Tony Leung is the film's MVP. He oozes charisma, swagger, coolness, effortless badassery, and more importantly, he also has the dramatic chops to sell the villain's tragic motivations, making the Mandarin not only one of the coolest, but also one of the most sympathetic MCU villains. He's right up there with Killmonger,
Mhm.
Vulture, and Thanos in terms of how much we can empathize with him.
Oh yeah.
In terms of the character work, the antagonist, the callbacks to MCU lore, ranging from Abomination and Wong to Ben Kingsley's return as Trevor, the actor. Um, Shang-Chi started out as great fun, but then I kind of feel like it falls off a cliff.
Oh yeah.
But before I get to the bad points, what do you think about the movie overall?
Oh, I was so excited, and I
Yeah,
really, really enjoyed 2/3 of the movie.
yeah,
Yeah, that's essentially it. I think the
mhm,
costuming is great. I think like they really hit like this kind of sweet spot between, this idea of like it's not an orientalized film. You get what I
yep,
mean? Right? Like
yep,
it's very, very true. Like it pays respect to its roots. The costuming is great. You
hmm,
understand, that there is this tension between, being a millennial, third culture kid, um, all of that jazz, fantastic stuff. They nailed
Mhm.
it very succinctly in just a couple of scenes. Gives you
Mhm.
all the action you want. Like you said, one of the best fight scenes that we got in the bus fight scene is like it might be one of the best fight scenes of the film itself.
Definitely.
For sure, right?
Yeah.
Yes, a lot of things about the soundtrack is great. Great kind of host of characters. I think the casting, as far as like Tony Leung and
Mhm.
yeah, like, Tony Leung, amazing, amazing, head and shoulders above everyone else. Might be the best villain that we've seen in the MCU.
Yeah.
Simu does a great job.
Yep.
Aquafina, like I continue to grow in respect and admiration for Aquafina. I think she did a great job as well.
Yeah.
Um, Martial arts and Jordan, martial art gear and Jordans. I'm for it. I'm all for it. I'm
Mhm.
there for it. I love that. Yeah, but I don't know. I think the sacrifice that they made in order to connect with the larger universe,
Mhm.
by falling literally into the mystical,
Yep.
was not a worthwhile trade off. I
Mm.
get it. You need Wong to show up. You need Wong to, say he's the new Nick Fury now. You need Wong to say, you know what, we need everybody to get on this because
Yep.
the universe is at stake instead. Sure, I
Mhm.
understand that. Was there some way to do it without having what's his face dweller in darkness show up? I don't know. Um,
Mhm.
give me more of what was great. This
Mhm.
amazing father son dynamic that is tortured and that is stretched and that is nuanced and painful to watch in so many ways. Like, give me more of that, right?
Yep.
Give me more of this pull between a man's lifestyle of criminality and the innate goodness that he has found. Give me more of that, right?
Yeah.
Like, you paid Tony Leung a bunch of money, let him do
Mhm.
his job, and not, yeah, not leave it up to this kind of like imaginary embodiment of evil to kind of
Mm.
round off the show. That's my feelings on it. More or less.
Yeah, yeah. Shang-Chi struggles mightily in its middle and climactic portions. The fun pace and tremendous momentum grinds to a screeching halt when we arrive in Talo, a kind of mystical city filled with mythical Chinese creatures and warriors. While the high fantasy visualization of the city and the creatures are wonderful, the kind of 30-minute exposition dump and slapdash world building is kind of lazy and boring. This all leads to a big third act that loses the emotional resonance and intimacy of the film's setup to give way to empty spectacle. Giant kaiju start fighting, soul-sucking demons swarm the air, and while it's all kind of pretty to look at, it totally distracts and detracts from the emotional core of the Mandarin and Shang-Chi's emotional and physical fight.
Yeah,
Um, Once again, the Marvel formula kind of rears its head in the third act, reducing what could have truly been a poignant father-son story into a kind of brain-numbing CGI mayhem spectacular. The film lost my attention in the last third, which
yeah,
is a shame because everything that came before was spectacular. That being said, this was still a really entertaining film
uh
with
huh,
tons of potential for the future, and because it made you love the characters enough to want to see them again,
yeah,
Simu and Aquafina specifically, especially as they're folded into the larger MCU. Even though it stumbles on the landing, I think it earns enough goodwill to keep you happy and to keep you looking forward to the future of these characters.
yeah.
Any final thoughts before we go to our ratings?
Yeah, exactly like you said, right? Like, enough goodwill for me to totally want to see whatever adventure these two go on, with
Hmm.
Wong or without Wong.
Hmm.
Moving forward, not to take away from the fact that the CGI is pretty phenomenal. It is. It's great CGI. It is a great fight. It just does not belong in this particular movie, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah,
Um, yeah, go throw it somewhere else, to what if maybe. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I came away smiling. But yeah, it just could have been so much more.
Yeah, that's why I'm rating it a 6 out of 10. What about you?
It's a 6 out of 10 for me as well.
All right. We're sticking with Disney and moving to Disney Plus here to talk about Star Wars Visions, which is an anthology series of 9 animated shorts produced by 7 of Japan's most respected anime studios. Each installment boasts a distinct artistic style and distinct tones. Almost all the characters in Visions are original creations, and as with all successful anthology series, Visions excels at getting viewers emotionally invested in each character they meet, despite the limited screen time. That's all the more impressive given the series' brevity. The
Hmm.
episodes are short,
Yep.
ranging from 13 to 21 minutes each. Though some of them are bound to leave viewers wanting to know what happens next, they are all, for the most part, satisfying, self contained stories. From adorable robots dreaming and becoming Jedi to an interstellar rock band putting on one last concert to save their friend from Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah.
Every episode is something new and something fresh. The most exciting thing about anthologies, especially ones set within existing IPs, take the Animatrix for example,
Yeah.
is that they offer a chance for diehard fans to see their beloved series from new angles. And here, Visions doesn't disappoint, with some of the best shots in the anthology radically reinventing or reinterpreting classic iconography
Hmm.
in ways that both honor what came before while offering us something new. There is also a refreshing um, kind of consistency between the quality of the shots, even as the styles and genres differ substantially. Are there some
Yep.
better than the others? Of
Hmm.
course they are, but like none of them are outright bad. What are your thoughts on the series in general, and what are your favorite episodes?
Oh, okay. I think generally Visions is great in the promise of what may come in the future, right? Like
Mm,
Star Wars meeting anime, perfect combination. Like I think like
mhm.
we definitely need more of that.
Yep,
Anime is the perfect medium for us to kind of like stretch the boundaries of what Star Wars could possibly be, both visually and just in terms of the tonality that a lot of the time anime brings along with it that we won't
yep,
get in the live action and we won't necessarily get with the very fantastic animated series that we've gotten um, from Lucasfilm Studios.
yep.
Um, is it Lucasfilm Studios?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Well, I mean, Dave Filoni is running it, but
yeah,
yeah, it
yeah,
is still Lucasfilm. Yeah.
yeah. So that being said, I do think that Vision this time round does offer a very unique kind of a visual aesthetic. Obviously differing from studio to studio to what most people imagine a Star Wars thing might look like.
Yeah.
I welcome it because I mean, not all of them are necessarily like brilliant, though some of
Mm-hmm.
them are. It's uneven, just like you said, and just like the storytelling and the stories are uneven as well. From that point of view, but they are. I mean, it feels like the best kind of fanfic,
Yep.
right? Meeting like one of my favorite visual mediums.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it as a whole. Things that
Mm.
stand out to me, favorite episode by far, and I
Yeah.
think it says something about the studio that did it is Ninth
Mm.
Jedi, which is episode 5.
Yep. Yep.
Done by Production IG, right?
Mm-hmm.
Heavyweights. Even in this list of like great studios, right? Production
Mm-hmm.
IG is by far the big boy here.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the fight scenes phenomenal. The landscapes, all the background animation, fantastic, right? Like it's
Mm.
something that you totally expect out of Production IG, who consistently puts out triple A anime titles every season, almost without fail.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Um, I love it. Voice acting, fantastic. Uh,
The story twists were great in that
oh
one in
yeah,
particular. A
yeah.
lot of stuff I did not see coming. Yeah.
Yeah, we won't get into spoiler territory necessarily, but yeah, Ninth Jedi as you. I thought that Tatooine Rhapsody was fun.
Yeah.
And I mean, Colorido isn't a huge, necessarily huge studio, but
Yep.
they are well respected because they have done a couple of things. If you've watched on Netflix, there's this movie about a cat called Whisker Away that I believe Hits reviewed some time ago. That's by
Mm-hmm.
them.
Mm-hmm.
I also reviewed something called Burn the Witch, which is actually the British equivalent of Soul Society in Bleach, if you
Right.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did those two, and they've done like a bunch of like Pokemon stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they're much smaller in terms of like scale to production IG. But
Mm-hmm.
man, the story is so fun. Damn, like
Yeah.
bringing back the music to Tatooine, it's just
Mm.
like it's so kind of like spot on, and it feels like one of those music idol anime like theme stuff, which I'm not super big on, but I have watched like Detroit heavy metal and some of
Yeah.
those ilk. I really really like that. Yeah, I think those two are like by far my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the ones that kind of stand out to me. I think the last episode, Akakiri, is not bad.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
Visually, I think like what's the studio called? Science Saru has a very unique approach to the anime style.
Mm-hmm.
Which yeah, I mean it's not bad. I think maybe if I were to pick kind of three, I'll pick those three.
Definitely, in addition to that, I mean, I second your sentiments, and to spotlight some of the other episodes that you
Yep.
haven't mentioned.
Yep.
Among the most compelling is the first of the series called the Duel, which it kind of immediately throws you in this Jedi infused mishmash of Seven Samurai and
Yep.
the Hidden Fortress, a story about a village on the Outer Rim fighting back against evil raiders with the help of a surprisingly sympathetic Sith.
Yeah.
The animation is this like grainy black and white, Kurosawa homage all the way, with Kamikaze Duga offering crisp, enticing
Oh yeah.
eye candy as the red green blazes of the blaster fire and the lightsaber battles. They kind of punctuate and contrast the otherwise sharp black and white presentations.
Yep.
It's the pure literaza. It's so purely beautiful and very enticing and such a homage to samurai.
Yep.
It's beautiful. This is the studio that does like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, right? So
Yeah, when I heard that they were doing it, right, a part of me was just like, I really wish they do like a full on JoJo style thing.
mm,
But unfortunately, that's like, uh, I'm very sure somewhere out there are fans that are gonna do it. So
yeah.
I will wait for that. But yeah, like Kamikaze Doga, they basically only, I mean,
Hmm.
JoJo's what they've known for. They've done Batman Ninja, which we've
Yeah.
reviewed as well. Um, and then a bunch of other like pretty solid stuff. But yeah, visually stunning. Yeah, I kind of forgot
Yeah.
about that. Like it's very solid. It was shorter than I wanted it to be,
Hmm.
which is saying something
Yeah,
for sure.
there's also T0B1, which is an Osamu Tezuka kind of styled story about a
Yep.
young droid who looks like Astro Boy, who has aspirations of becoming a Jedi Knight,
Yeah.
and what happens when he finally gets his chance. From a This one is, in terms of story, is my least favorite,
Yeah.
but from a pure animation standpoint, the
Yeah.
most dazzling
Yeah. Yeah.
is the twins
Uh huh.
from Studio Trigger, the studio that did Promare,
Yeah.
about this pair of clone race Sith siblings, voiced in the English dub by Neil Patrick Harris and Alison Brie, who do battle over the ownership of a Kyber crystal. Like Promare, it's very highly hyper stylized motion and big emotions, cameras whirling and warping around lightsabers and ships and characters to capture kind of this over the top action.
Yep.
It's probably as a story, it's probably my least favorite and the dumbest of them
Yeah,
all.
but
But from
like
the animation is incredible.
it's like anime on crack, and I fucking love it. I mean, you talked extensively about Roman and how much you love that.
Yeah.
They've also done like Darling in the Franxx. They did Little Witch
Mm.
Academia. They
Yeah.
did Kill or Kill. They did Kill or Kill. Like that whole like style is kind of amazing. And I kind of get it. Like a lot of their anime from Roman to Kill or Kill in particular,
Hmm.
they've required a lot more time to get into like the meat of the story. So for
Hmm.
them, like just like balls to the wall, visual, spectacular. Yeah, it's par for the course, and it's a
Yeah.
ride lah for sure.
Definitely, I also really like Lop and Oko, which is a politically complex tale about two sisters,
Yep.
one biological and one adopted. torn between their allegiances to the village that the empire occupies and the father who raised them. In kind of the same vein, but in a very different style, the Village Bride is a nice little Miyazaki ripoff, and I mean that in a good way.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So there's so much versatility to mine from this universe, not just aesthetically but thematically.
Yep.
I think Visions is very wild in its swings, and its vivid reconceptualizing of the universe is freed from the obligations of canon,
Hmm.
and in doing so becomes one of the most exciting pieces of Star Wars media I've seen in years. This along with the Mandalorian, I think Star Wars has finally recovered from the stink of the sequels, the J.J. Abrams sequels, and is finally now fully fledged on the right track. How would you rate Star Wars Visions? I'm personally giving it, I
Uh
think, an 8 out of 10 for me.
oh, okay. I'm gonna give it a 7.5 out of 10.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's plenty of good stuff. Again, like, and keep in mind that our score for this is kind of like the average, right? I think like some of these are like a solid 8 and 8.5,
Mm,
for sure. But like, to have just just the very idea of Star Wars Vision itself is like amazing to me, right? To have some of the most amazing animation studios in Japan who have made some of my
mhm,
favorite anime of all time, right,
mhm.
come and do another franchise that I'm super super big about.
Yep.
Like, just the marriage of that in and of itself got me excited, and I think to a large extent they delivered it. And like I said at
Mhm.
the very beginning, it is really about where this might possibly go,
Yeah.
more than anything else, right? Like, this is proof of concept that they completely hit out about.
100%. Yep. If you haven't seen Star Wars Visions, it's available right now on Disney Plus. And probably by the time this comes out, Shang-Chi will probably also be available on Disney Plus by then as well. Next up, let's move on from one streaming service to another. Let's talk about Netflix, and I'm going to talk about Mike Flanagan, who is one of the best horror auteurs working today.
Oh yeah.
He is genuinely one of Genre Equality's favorite creators. If you've listened to our past reviews of
Yep.
his shows and films, his new miniseries is called Midnight Mass, and it's set on isolated Crockett Island, where the town's small community of 100 or so people is shaken by the return of a disgraced young man and the arrival of a preacher.
Hmm.
When the preacher seemingly brings forth miraculous events, an intense religious fervor begins to sweep the island. Its inhabitants are now forced to ask themselves whether these miracles are real, and if so, are they worth their price? It's a premise that's exactly as creepy as you come to expect from Flanagan,
Hmm.
and there are some distinct horror touches from the creator that are very haunting. But it's not pure horror per se. Much in the same way that The Haunting of Bly Manor was more of a gothic romance than it was a horror. Um, Midnight Mass never truly starts in the traditional sense of TV.
Yep.
It more like quietly unfolds. In fact, little to nothing happens in the miniseries' first 3 episodes. If
Yeah.
you are not into slow burns, this may frustrate you quite a bit. I appreciate that Flanagan goes to such great lengths to make this world feel lived in.
Uh-huh.
It's that groundwork and character work that makes what happens next feel so special.
Yeah.
There's an excellent story hiding in Midnight Mass. The series is an it's at its core, it's a frightening exploration of faith and fanaticism, underlined by rich themes, by empathetic character studies, and dread-filled tensions. It is less
Yeah.
interested in bumps in
Yeah.
the night than exploring spiritual questions and the role that organized religion plays in uniting and dividing communities. But getting to these pivotal moments require 3 hours, almost half the show. You've seen most of it, right? How do you feel about the pacing
Yeah.
of the show, and what are your thoughts overall?
Ooh. Very honestly, like,
Yep.
first episode, I was just like, oh my god, really? And then I remind myself, this is Mike Flanagan.
Mm.
But that being said, this might still be the slowest Mike Flanagan so far,
Yep.
right? Like, for both the houses, we got them. We had to give them like 2 episodes. This one
Yep.
is like a solid like three and a third of an episode before things actually kind of pick up.
Well,
But
the
then,
ending of the third episode is probably the big turning point that will hook viewers, but it takes a while to get there, lah. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, so it is incredibly slow, but I took a breath. I took a break. I came back to it, and like kind of maybe because I was so excited that we got another Mike Flanagan on our hands. I
Mm-hmm.
was ready to kind of dive into that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you calm down and you take your time
Mm-hmm.
with it, or rather you take what time it gives you,
Yep.
um, like it's very beautiful and
Mm-hmm.
extremely calming, and
Mm-hmm.
immersing yourself in that vibe,
Mm-hmm.
and the tone of the story before you get to the juicy bits
Mm-hmm.
is incredibly important, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like most of the time, like if it's something worth skipping, we would tell you like just watch it from end of episode 3 onwards or whatever, right?
Yep.
But no, you have to sit through it because it sets the entire tone for everything that comes next. The things that
Yeah.
come next are only shocking because of the fact that you've taken the time to get to know the characters, to get to know
Mm-hmm.
what this little community is about. It you can't skip the world building here,
Mm-hmm.
because it is so integral to the way things unfold later on.
Yep.
And it was only when things started to pick up, or
Mm-hmm.
well, there's a specific moment in which things pick up, lah. Let's just put it that way.
Yep.
Uh, Everything falls into place, and they're like, oh, okay, I get it now. Yeah, sure. Like
Mm.
those 3 hours, well worth it, right?
Yeah.
And that is not to say like the first 3 episodes don't have their own merit. It's incredibly
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. It's so well shot, right? Like as you would expect from a Flanagan production.
Yeah.
The coloring is so good. That's the
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing that kind of sticks out to me the most, right? Like you've
Mm.
got like this little island, and like just the scenery, and even like the
Mm-hmm.
indoor shots with sometimes like with their fireplaces and things like that. Like, oh
Mm.
my god. Like if you didn't know it was a horror film, it might be some sort of rustic slice of life thing.
Yeah.
um
It gave me a lot of my brilliant friend vibes in the
yeah.
first few episodes. Yeah.
Yeah, and it felt nice. It felt good.
Yeah.
And then you realize why you're watching this. You're reminded about why you're watching this, and it just
Mm-hmm.
adds to that. So yeah, if you started and you haven't continued because you think it's too slow, please give it a chance.
Yeah.
I am like midway through the penultimate episode because, yeah, it just came out anyway. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I am totally enjoying where I'm at right now. In fact, after
Yeah.
this, I'm probably gonna go and finish it up. Um,
Awesome. The climax is very worth it, and Isa is right. Yeah, some may be turned off by the laborious space. It's a clear barrier to entry. I understand
yep,
that.
yep,
In this day and age where there's so much to watch, requesting that you give something 3 hours feels a bit insulting, but if it wasn't worth it, I would tell you. And in this case, it is worth it.
yep.
I personally didn't mind the pace. It's kind of more my speed anyway.
Hmm.
Yeah, I do 100% clearly acknowledge the show kind of could have used tighter editing.
Oh
It
yeah,
really could.
yeah, yeah.
It is way too overlong. And one other criticism of the show that I was most bothered with was I love the show overall. I liked it, and for all the reasons I mentioned, but the kind of unnatural stagey dialogue where every character, whether they are a priest or a paralyzed teen, seem to have the same tendency towards speechifying.
Yeah.
Literally everyone is given at least one big speech to show off how great of an actor they are. They're good at their job. But as superb as every actor is, it's a kind of parlor trick that gets old fast once you notice it.
Yep.
Um, every like human beings do not speak in like 18-page monologues. It just doesn't happen. Yet once the show kind of clicks, its alchemy of tension and suspense and storytelling reveals itself to be really incredible stuff and will reward your patience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand everyone's like viewing queue is miles long.
Hmm.
Asking to give any show a few episodes before it quote unquote gets good, it's not something a lot of people are into these days. But
Yeah.
that's exactly what Midnight Mass requires.
Yeah.
If you give Flanagan's new series the time it deserves, you'll be treated to a soulful and gorgeously acted story about what faith means,
Hmm.
a truly satisfying finale, and seen in its entirety. Midnight Mass is, I think, absolutely worth your time. I'm giving this a 7.5 out of 10. Of the of the 5.5 episodes you've seen, how would you rate it?
Oh, it's a solid 7 for me, all the way up to now. I don't know what the climax is. I'm super excited,
Hmm.
but like up to this point, it's a solid 7 out of 10 for me.
Okay, cool, awesome. Next, we'll move on to the latest season, season 5 of My Hero Academia, which is, of course, one of the best and most popular shonen anime of the modern era.
Hmm.
We're going to be talking about an eventful 24 episodes that have just wrapped up. This season started off with the fun joint training arc that pitted Class 1A against Class 1B,
Yep.
giving a rare spotlight to those in the other class. Then we had an emotional work study arc as Midoriya Bakugo went to work with Todoroki at Endeavor's agency,
Hmm.
giving well earned emotional closure to the saga of Todoroki's childhood abuse and
Yep.
Endeavor's search for redemption in the eyes of his kids. However, its climactic meta-human liberation arc, where the League of Villains take center stage as
Hmm. Hmm.
protagonists, is exceptional. The best part of season 5.
Yeah.
Heck, the show is even rebranded as My Villain Academia for a time.
Yeah.
It features not just great action and stakes, but phenomenal character work for Tomura, Himiko, Twice, and the rest as we learn about their tragic backstories.
Yep.
It's honestly the most excited I've been for MHA. Not that MHA has been bad by any means for the last
Yeah.
two or three seasons, but this is the most exciting arc that I've personally seen in probably the last 3 seasons, and it's been my favorite. What about you? What do you think about MHA season 5?
I feel like season 5 overall has the
Mm.
wonderful advantage of presenting to us characters that we only see in the background, right? Or they're the foil, or they're a plot device, and all of that. But
Yeah.
they get breathing room now. They get their
Mm-hmm.
own kind of like little snippets of their backstory. Some of them are developed more than others. Our villains get a ton of work done, which is great.
Yep.
Because like a lot of modern shonen anime that we've
Mm-hmm.
gotten in the last couple of years, My Hero Academia included, is that it is authors have learned that it is very very important to give a very balanced view of the conflict that you have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Humanize your villains, and people will love it.
Yeah.
And like this is the epitome of that exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just being able to kind of balance everything out. And it of course plays into our protagonist Midoriya's entire disposition and his willingness to see good in others
Mm-hmm.
overall, and just kind of plays into that entire idea, right? But if as an audience we don't get to see that as well, then maybe down the line, no spoilers,
Yeah.
uh Midoriya's actions may not make as much sense.
Mm.
I think, right, like how it fits into kind of the greater scheme of things of where um the story past the anime is at now.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, but I fully love that. I really like it when large ensemble, um when you have a large ensemble cast,
Yep.
like we have here in My Hero Academia,
Mm-hmm.
dares to flesh out the minor characters and then go one step further to bring in even more minor characters as
Mm-hmm.
reflections and or counterpoints to your favorite characters. Like
Mm.
that is, oh man, like it's a lot of work. It is a ton of work to do,
Mm-hmm.
but for you to kind of flesh that out is just a testament to the kind of storytelling that we are getting from, what a lot of people dismiss as a shonen anime, like just another shonen anime, right? The numbers beg
Yeah.
to differ, the fan base around the world begs to differ, but I still see people kind of like dismissing it without ever having watched it necessarily.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I really really love that. Just like rounding out the immediate world among our favorite heroes, or heroes in
Mm-hmm.
training,
Mm-hmm.
is vastly important. And then two, for the second, well, for the last third of the season, to get
Mm.
like full backstory, like
Mm.
full juicy gory horrorful tragic backstory
Mhm.
from perhaps, well, two of the main villains, I guess, and twice thrown in there as kind of like a good measure.
Yep.
Uh, is like it's such a treat, man. Damn, that's like strawberries and sugar on top. So
Oh,
good.
definitely. The My Villain Academia arc has kind of reignited my fervor for watching MHA week to week. Like
Yep.
I've never like lost interest in it.
Yeah.
It's just that like I've always found something lacking with the League of Villains. I've never quite put my finger on it. That I
Yep.
never just felt invested in them. But right now, and this is the highest compliment that I can give League of Villains,
Uh huh.
I'm as interested in them as I am in the Phantom Troop in Hunter x
Oh,
Hunter.
wow, that is big, dude. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I completely hear you. I completely hear you. And again, like Hunter did it first, right?
yeah, yeah.
They did it first twice. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, totally. Like, I mean, like, I think, when they did twice, I was a little bit
Mm-hmm.
surprised because I didn't think he necessarily had a big enough role for that. But much like,
Yeah.
at the beginning of the season with Class B,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of the same thing, right? Like you have he is still, for all intents and purposes, a minor character. He, for all
Mm-hmm.
intents and purposes, will continue to be around that level for a large swath of the story.
Yep.
And but he has an extremely compelling backstory that, if
Mm-hmm.
you sit down to think about it for more than 5 minutes, you're like, wow, that's really fucked up. I
Mm-hmm.
understand why he is the way he is, cause like that's really fucked up. And
No.
and like it's not necessarily to be the big bad,
Mm-hmm.
the BBGE, right?
Yeah.
Um, uh, which we do get in two solid like episodes.
Yeah.
Especially for Shigaraki, like
Yeah.
that is just it's important, right? Like to have something that's more well rounded out than that. Like
Mm.
it's not a damn, what was it that you were saying with Fruitless Basket? It's not like a trauma
Porn.
competition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not a trauma competition here, and where you place in the world with your trauma, it doesn't mean the greater your trauma necessarily the more evil you are.
Yep.
um you know and I think that's important. There's a nuance there that is often lacking in a lot of shonen type anime,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't bother to take the time with their characters. And
Mm.
we if you've been listening to us for a while, you know that we both love character work, right?
Yeah, definitely.
um yeah.
And also, I mean, the League of Villains just never felt as cool as, let's say, the Yakuza gang that we got,
Oh yeah.
from the previous seasons, and certainly like not as cool as, like I mentioned, the Phantom Troop, lah, but
Yeah.
it's getting there now, lah, with the groundwork that's laid
Yeah.
in My Villain Academia. So I'm starting to see them as a force. I'm starting to be invested in
Oh
them,
yeah.
and I want to watch more of it. Like with that being said, as a whole, how would you rate the season?
I still do feel there are quite a number of like filler episodes, but then again, that is to be expected of a 24 episode season.
Yeah.
And like it's not good filler necessarily. Like previous seasons, like we got pretty good filler.
Mm.
This time not so much. The Christmas one,
Yeah.
some of it here, some of it there. But like just for the sheer amount of awesome character work from Endeavor and his family, from our
Yep.
mainline heroes to the minor characters in B to the My Villain Academia, I'm gonna
Yeah.
give it a solid 8, which
Okay.
might
Cool.
be the
Mm-hmm.
best score I've given it since season one.
Definitely,
Yeah,
yeah. I'm giving this. I've usually rated it about 7 out of 10, so I'm gonna give this one a 7.5 out
yep,
of 10.
yep.
Nice. Next up, I'm gonna dive into quick hits, which is a little segment where I talk about some of the shows and movies that my co-host hasn't been able to watch. First off, I gotta touch upon Why the Last Man, which is based on one of the most revered comics of all time by Brian K. Vaughan, who is one of my favorite comic book writers of all time. Why the Last Man takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where an unknown calamity has killed every animal with a Y chromosome except for a man named Yorick Brown and
Hmm.
his pet monkey Ampersand. We follow Yorick as he journeys through this new world of women, as he and his new female friends fend off threats and seek to build a new society. Unfortunately, this live adaptation lacks the wit of Brian K. Vaughan's dialogue, and the imagination of his world building. It ends up being a very by the numbers type of post apocalypse story. There's nothing overtly bad about it, it's a solid show, but a frustrating one that frequently struggles to embrace what's unique about itself. The series can have provocative moments, the pace is generally compelling, but it's just never as entertaining as the comic was. The series has some thematic richness, and it sets up several terrific monologues to underline its speculative choices. It poses rich questions about gender, about power, about collective trauma, but does it have the intelligence and visual force to properly interrogate them?
Hmm.
I haven't seen any evidence of that.
Yeah.
The biggest issue about the show is that it's talky and murky, and although the storytelling doesn't exactly lag, it never finds the right balance with its action and adventure elements. Despite a good cast, it's a shame to say that the show feels rather too generic for anyone suffering from dystopian fatigue.
Oh yeah.
Uh, so this is a 5 out of 10 for me. Not overly bad, but not good
Ah,
either.
that's disappointing, man.
Yeah.
The comic is one of my favorite.
All
Yeah.
time. Yeah, Brian K. Vaughan, like everything he touches is gold, including his latest saga,
Mhm.
which is definitely unfilmable. But oh well.
We will
Uh
see. Someone might try it. You never know.
Guys with like computer heads are just like weird. I don't know whether I can accept it in live action.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
maybe in animated form I might. Anyways, let's move on to season 3 of Doom Patrol.
All right.
From the Suicide Squad to Legends of Tomorrow to the animated Harley Quinn series, it seems like screen adaptations of DC properties work best when it leads into like really weird, madcap, offbeat, and absurd kind of stories. And perhaps no other adaptation exudes this kind of freewheeling sense of inventiveness and comedy more than Doom Patrol. It's a wild and a wonderful third season that sees our profoundly damaged misfit heroes kind of find renewed purpose and a lot of vulgar fun. Truly, the series' black humor and wackiness and surprising heart continues to be a really ridiculous gonzo experience. And
Mhm.
I was worried for a bit because the tail end of season 2 lost me because the show sacrificed a lot of the madcap energy for a lot of hand wringing, dour pathos without the counterbalance of fun.
Yeah.
Thankfully, though, after the premiere episode of season 3, that quickly wraps up the lingering storylines of season 2.
Hmm.
And the show kind of reasserts its best version of itself. It becomes once again a series about a bunch of fucked up weirdos that don't let their inner turmoil and pain keep them from throwing caution to the wind and kind of just saying yes to every ludicrous predicament that comes their way. All the actors on the show are great. They're great at the heart and the humor of the story because they commit so wholeheartedly to it. Diane Guerrero is easily the show's MVP once again because playing Crazy Jane, she has these 64 distinct personalities that she plays with like often black energy but turned up to 11. All her scenes kind of maintain this crackling energy, which is aided by the character finally getting opportunities to be in a good mood this season, and a lot of the characters are in good moods this season, which elevates the sense of fun. The series it has this knack for maintaining standalone adventures while still driving forward the larger season-long arcs. Very old school TV storytelling, and it remains one of its best qualities. No one is stuck endlessly brooding, a la season 2. They all react with foul-mouthed bemusement that the show is so that made the show so entertaining in the first place. Each new journey is it's another chance for this fusion of over the top spectacle and lacerating humor, and it's all kind of liberally dosed with profoundly humanist storytelling. It's kind of hitting on all cylinders this season, so I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. Next up, let's move on to the 2021 version of Candyman.
Hmm.
For those who don't know, Candyman was one of my favorite horror films growing up. The imposing and iconic figure of Tony Todd struck such a chord with me as a kid. The film's use of Cabrini Green as its setting, the notorious public housing project in Chicago, it allowed it to mix scares with potent themes exploring class and race in inner city America. It was one of the first times I've noticed that horror can also be an effective vehicle for social commentary. As such, this new sequel to Candyman by Nia DaCosta has been up there as one of my favorite and one of my most anticipated horror films for quite some time. For those unfamiliar, here's the breakdown of the story. For as long as residents can remember, the housing projects of Chicago's Cabrini Green neighborhood has been terrorized by a word of mouth urban legend, a supernatural killer with a hook for a hand, who is summoned by those daring to speak his name 5 times into a mirror. In the present day, a decade after the last of the Cabrini Green towers were torn down, visual artist Anthony McCoy, played by Yahya Abdul Mateen II, and his partner, a gallery director named Brianna Cartwright, move into a luxury condo loft in Cabrini, now gentrified beyond recognition
Hmm.
and inhabited by outwardly mobile millennial people. Uh, Anthony finds that his painting career is on the brink of stalling. He has a chance encounter with a Cabrini Green old timer played by Coleman Domingo. You may recognize him as Ali from Euphoria,
Yeah.
who exposes Anthony to the tragically horrific nature and the true story of Candyman. He's anxious to maintain his status in the Chicago art world, so Anthony begins to explore these macabre details in his studio as fresh inspiration for his paintings. Unknowingly, his explorations opens a door for the return of Candyman, and all hell breaks loose. It has a great premise, it has a great cast, its themes seem to be faithfully updated from the original film. It has some really well intentioned ideas about how to depict Black American trauma through a horror lens. Unfortunately, this new Candyman is far too didactic in its approach. This new sequel is so blunt in its message driven purpose that it flattens into something entirely generic. You know the saying, a picture paints 1,000 words? This movie tries to explain a picture in 1,000 words. Um, I think 2021 Candyman fundamentally misunderstands the allure of the original, and at worst of all, has nothing meaningful or new to say or insightful to say about the contemporary ideas that it's observing. Though it delivers some entertaining comedy and bloodshed and gore, Candyman is so clunky and so overtly unsubtle in its metaphors that it kills its subtext. Like it kills its subtext like more brutally than Candyman has ever killed a person.
Oof.
It is it terrible? No, it's not. It crafts some good scares and some good set pieces and some beautifully haunting imagery, but it's not smart and it's not thought provoking. At least not as thought provoking as it thinks it is. So it's a 5 out of 10 for me. Next up, let's move on to Adventure Time Distant Lands, Wizard City. Adventure Time is back for the final installment of its Distant Lands mini-series, and after 3 delightful hour-long episodes featuring BMO,
Hmm.
Marceline, and Princess Bubblegum, and the reunion between Finn and Jake, this fourth and final entry focuses on Peppermint Butler. It's a weird choice for the final episode, but hey, what else, you know? It's called it's called Wizard City because this episode follows Peppermint Butler after he lost his collected knowledge and maturity in season 10, basically reverting back into a child. Pep lost not only the ability to speak, but also his mastery of dark magic. So the Candy Kid has begun to grow up again and is now a young teen, and he set out to study magic at the academy in Wizard City. Um, However, things are much harder for him now because he's trying to keep his villainous identity a secret. He's frustrated at how slow the process of relearning magic is, and he's bullied by the cool magic school students. This is an entirely standalone entry that features a cast of new characters
Hmm.
and a series of new mysteries. The mysteries primarily involve some students and faculty being murdered
Uh-huh.
and some ancient artifacts going missing. Immediately, suspicion is cast on Peppermint Butler because of his checkered past, so
Yeah.
he must prove his innocence. Principal amongst the new fellow outcast Kadibra, who is the niece of Abracadaniel, I'm sorry. And Kadibra is just going to visit school because of family pressure. She's not
Yeah.
interested in real magic. She wants to be a stage illusionist and a sleight of hand magician, which she considers to be the more skillful and glamorous art form. She's quite a delight overall and quite a contrast to the more serious magician that Peppermint Butler is. All in all, it's probably a less impactful episode in terms of mythology, stakes, and emotional resonance than the other Distant Lands features, but it's still a good episode of Adventure Time that's cute and quirky and entertaining, so it's a 7 out of 10 for me.
Mm.
Finally, I'm going to be talking about Malignant, which is by horror golden boy James Wan, who returns from superhero land back to where he comes from, to the horror genre.
Yep.
The guy created The Conjuring and the Saw franchises, so he's got a pretty solid track record. Even Aquaman, notwithstanding its quality, was one of the rare box office successes for Warner Brothers. Um, his new film, Malignant, follows a woman named Madison who
Mm-hmm.
is paralyzed by shocking visions of grisly murders. And her torment worsens when she discovers that these waking dreams are, in fact, actually happening. Thus, she decides to try to save these victims. Um, Sadly, this kind of turns out to be a humorless melodrama that sits somewhere between a slasher, a ghost story, and a possession flick, never kind of fully embracing either.
Yep.
The result is a kind of confusing mix of genre archetypes that lacks a clear point of view, even a surface level stylistic one.
Mm-hmm.
The characterizations are paper thin, the dialogue is perfunctory, and the performances are, to put it charitably, kind of adequate at best.
Ooh.
So up until the last 30 minutes, right, I was considering giving this a 3 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
Up until the last 30 minutes, what does redeem the film is the last 30 minutes. I'm not going to spoil it, but it has the craziest, fucking coolest ending that blew my mind. That elevated it from a 3 out of 10 to a 5 out of 10. It's
Okay.
insane. Like
Okay. Okay.
it's worth watching just for the last half hour. I won't spoil what it is,
All right.
but I was like, I for 1 hour 15 minutes, I was like, fuck this movie, and then last half hour, I was like, yeah, this movie rocks, you know. So overall, it's a 5 out of 10. I don't know because a lot of it sucks, but
Yeah.
part of it is really cool here.
Yeah.
So yeah, there you
Uh,
go.
yeah. It's always hard, right? Like when they stick a landing that they don't really quite earn. It's
Yeah,
hard. Yeah.
yeah. And next up, though, I mean, let's throw it over to Isa, who will
Uh,
talk about the conclusion of the Transformers War for Cybertron trilogy on Netflix. How did that go?
Oh man, oh man. Okay, so when the War for Cybertron trilogy first came out, I do remember. I think hits was it you and me?
Mm-hmm.
We reviewed Siege, which was the first one, right? And we gave it fairly decent scores, if for nothing else than the fact that competent CGI coupled with the fact that for the very first time in a Transformers franchise, you had a lot of dialogue that was
Mm-hmm.
actually very compelling and a long, if somewhat slow, treatise on the danger and nature and need for war, and revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a way for the disenfranchised to have themselves heard, right? Which has never in the history of Transformers ever happened before. And we gave it pretty decent scores for that. I actually missed the second chapter, which was Earthrise. I caught
Yep.
it a bit here and there. Nothing much. A continuation of the story. Not much of dialogue. A lot more action. They come to Earth and all of that. I was I hopped onto Kingdom, which is the chapter 3, because it deals with uh the Maximals and the Predacons, right? Which are, for
Mm.
those of you who are old enough, much like myself and his, come
Mm-hmm.
from the Beast Wars continuity of Transformers, which, in my mind, my nostalgically saturated mind, is one of the best Transformers series that has ever existed. It
Yep.
was the advent of like early CGI in cartoons together with things like um oh crap, I forgot what's the fighting insects movie called.
Bumblebee.
No, marines fighting insects. I just blanked out
Marines.
there.
Starship Troopers.
Yeah, Starship Troopers, right? Like that era of CGI, like horrible, terrible,
Yep.
hasn't aged well at all. But in my mind, I love those series. Back in kind of like mid 90s, I think. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I thought, okay, let's see what they're gonna do with this, right? Because there's like setting the tone with the fact that you're willing to go into a bit of a deeper examination of the world and the world building and the issues kind of surrounding that after the travesty that is the many 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 explosive Michael Bay movies.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I'll give it a chance. I am
Yep.
sad to say,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that the CGI doesn't live up to it,
Mm-hmm.
that the dialogue that's here is try hard at best. The
Yeah.
story is convoluted and confusing.
Mm.
There's time travel involved because of relativity, which is understandable, but they do a piss poor explanation of it. Um,
Mm.
it's a
Okay.
mess. It's a mess. And like, you got two Megatrons, and they just play it for laughs, which is incredibly sad because I think it's a missed opportunity to talk about like identity and all of that.
Oh.
Optimus Prime and Optimus Primal, they the interaction is just, it just feels extremely forced, unfortunately, right? And at times a
Mm-hmm.
bit out of character from what I think from my point of view as a Transformers fan as a kid, what they
Mm-hmm.
would necessarily do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm giving it a 4 out of 10.
Oof.
Just because like, like I feel there's enough there. Um if you're a kid who enjoys robots, right?
Yeah.
But given that Siege set the tone, and I thought, okay, this is going to be a bit more mature, this is going to be a bit more adult about
Mm-hmm.
things. And for the first time, you're really kind of delving into like issues that I would have never as a young kid think about or bother about or be interested in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and Yeah, just delving into kind of like the existential part of what it is to be a sentient robot fighting an eternal war. But then you get none of that, and I was very very disappointed. Right, the animals don't look great. The action's not great. The fights aren't great. Like there's nothing great about it. But there is enough transforming and robots to keep a kid happy for sure.
Yeah.
um is my thing. Yeah, and as a side note to that, if you want all of like what I've said about having mechs and like having like long philosophical, well thought out, compelling discussions about war and the nature of war and who are the victims of war, go watch Gundam Hathaway,
Yeah.
which is my very short endorsement before I throw it into an anime corner sometime down the road.
Mm. Definitely. Awesome. Okay, okay. So a 4 out of 10 lah. But so don't watch the War for Cybertron trilogy. I did not enjoy the first season,
Yeah.
so I guess I have no reason to continue.
No, 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 no point. Really, really no point. Like it feels a lot like, it feels like drudgery, which is why
Yep.
like I mean I put it on in the background while I was doing work and shit. It feels like
Hmm.
drudgery, much in the same way like the animated 3D Godzilla movies felt like drudgery, like that level of
Gotcha.
drudgery. And the CGI is nowhere near as good as Godzilla.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
so
Okay.
no
Okay.
bother.
All right. To cap off this episode of Genre Equality, I'm going to be talking and giving you a little guide to Isaac Asimov's Combine
Oh
Robots,
yeah.
Empire, and Foundation shared universe of novels. There are many books considered foundational to modern science fiction, right? From the works of Arthur C. Clarke to, of course, we've already talked about Frank Herbert. The sweeping genre, there's a lot of it in literature.
Yep.
In modern literature, there are a lot of great writers working right now, like Liu Cixin and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
But one of the most influential books of all time was the original Foundation series
Hmm.
by Isaac Asimov. Um, Without Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, the term and the concept of galactic empire would not have entered science fiction canon. The first book that ever introduced the idea of a galactic empire, without which there would be no Star Wars, there would be no Dune,
Hmm.
was Isaac Asimov.
Yep.
Um, the original Foundation trilogy, interestingly, has one of the most cool concepts I've ever seen in sci-fi. It centers on the concept of a fictional science called psychohistory, a science that allows people to predict future events. Mathematician Harry Seldon uses psychohistory to accurately predict the fall of a vast galactic empire, subsequently founding the foundation of scientists
Hmm.
and a second foundation of psychologists, which both endeavor to limit the impact of the fall of the empire, that and thereby ameliorate the consequences on its inhabitants. It's an incredible series of novels, and it was originally a collection of 8 short stories written by Isaac Asimov between 1942 and 1950.
Hmm.
It was published in Astounding Stories of Super Science, and that's the reason why the first couple of books on the Foundation series are not books per se, but collections of short stories.
Yep.
And much like, science fiction later on, the original trilogy wouldn't be the end of the story, as I discovered. In 1981, Asimov, 30 years after he finished the Foundation trilogy, was persuaded by his publisher to write another sequel, and Foundation's Edge was published the following year. More books will come, including Foundation and Earth in 1986, and then two prequels. The later books, interestingly though, tied up into Asimov's canon to create a single universe that combines his Robot series and Empire series
Mm-hmm.
into the Foundation series. It was very popular and influential, and it was fascinating. The Foundation series by itself is this unique blend of futuristic speculation and human history, with Asimov looking at our own past to envision the path that we may take once we finally reach the stars. For example, the Galactic Empire at the center of the series is based on the Roman Empire,
Mm-hmm.
which of course famously fell. As Asimov was writing this during World War II, we can also see those cataclysmic events echoed in the text. Indeed, the fall of empires resulting in violence and instability is a theme throughout the trilogy. Um, we see the end result of jingoism and the weaponization of patriotism, the disconnect of monarchies, and the essential futility of bravado in the face of war. The grand, sweeping narrative of Foundation is a departure from so many so-called space operas, because
Yeah.
unlike Star Wars or Luke Skywalker, and even unlike Dune, the story is not focused on individual greatness. The message here is that social and political movements that genuinely change the world and that will one day change the universe are not by single people.
Mm-hmm.
There are heroes in Foundation, but they are fulfilling their role in history, and the march of the grand narrative would survive with or without them. But what psychohistory does is predict sweeping trends of economics,
Yeah.
politics, religion, and so forth, like big social trends that will not be affected by one person or one great person or any number of great persons. It you just have no impact on the flow of politics. But yet, Foundation is not a bleak narrative. The novels focus on the role of the human spirit and how science and rationality can save the species,
Mm-hmm.
not by creating weapons of war, but through the underlying philosophies of science and inquiry and innovation. Essentially, what we can do through psychohistory is, and learning from history, is reduce the threats of tyrants with real solutions to the problems that they cause and exploit. In an era where kind of science denial
Yeah.
has become commonplace,
Mm-hmm.
Asimov's message that science and education will always triumph over militarism and ignorance has kind of never been more relevant. And the influence of Foundation is greatly felt through a lot of work from Star Trek all the way to Dune, as we mentioned.
Yeah.
Perhaps the Dune is probably the one that is most closely influenced by Foundation, although he has very different ideas about Frank Herbert has very different ideas about how to save humanity lah.
Yeah.
But in terms of broad context, with thousands of years, this chess game that's played from millennia is very similar to Foundation lah. This grand spanning narrative. Also, the fact that you never stick with one single character. Every short story, every book jumps ahead a few hundred years, a few thousand years
Mm-hmm.
to get to new characters and to see how the world and science and religions and politics have evolved over time
Yeah.
due to the influence of the Foundation and the second Foundation. So that's very cool. So I jumped into the Foundation series primarily because I wanted to hype myself up for the Foundation TV series. Um, I was not aware at all. I don't know whether you were. I don't know whether you were, but I was not aware at all that it connected to the Robots and Empire series. So I was only vaguely familiar with the Robot series because I
Yeah.
had read one book called Case of Steel, which is the
Yeah.
first the Neil Oliver detective story.
Uh-huh.
And was not familiar at all with the Empire series at all. Then at the end of Foundation and Earth, um, I'm gonna give a little bit of a spoiler here.
Yeah.
Uh, but the robot Daniel Oliver has survived for 3,000 years
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
is in the Foundation books. And that's when I was like, the fuck?
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, I get it. This kind of makes sense. Okay. The way the continuity is tied up is very neat.
Uh-huh. Yep.
But then it made me very dispirited. Not dispirited, like, it made me very angry because I was like, I was like, God damn it! I had there's like 15 other books I need to read now.
Yeah, yeah.
And which I did, and I'm glad I did. In fact, I chose to read those books before I read the Foundation prequels because the Foundation prequels, which were published later,
Yeah.
tied even more closely to the mythology
Yes.
of the robots and to the mythology of the Empire
Yeah.
novels. Were you familiar with the shared continuity at all?
Uh
Because I wasn't.
I was surprised. Okay, so I started out with the robot series, right?
Yeah.
Because I was I can't remember what was it. Like I think secondary school, I was doing a robotics class. They were talking about like the laws of robotics and stuff like that. I was like, where is that from? Isaac Asimov. Okay, let me go check that out. Then I started reading the robot
Mm,
series. Um so I didn't realize that it was all connected. Like I didn't touch Empire at all until much, much later.
mm,
But so I started with that. I got through a ton of that, and then I remember being at the library, and they didn't have the next robot one that I needed. Like somebody had already borrowed it, and I had to wait for it. But they did have the first Foundation book there, so I picked it up. So much in the
mm,
same way you discovered that there was a continuity thing, is the same way I
mm,
discovered it. But the difference is that I never read Empire. Yeah.
mm,
So I finished up Foundation. I finished up the rest of robots, and I never touched Empire. And I knew that there's this huge knowledge gap, right?
mm.
For me, just in terms that because if Empire has the most books,
No, Empire only has 3 books. It actually has
right?
the least
It has
books.
the
Yeah.
least books. Okay, cool. Yeah. So I didn't do Empire, and I think like at some point in there, I swapped over to Dune.
Right.
Like while doing all of that. Yeah, so
Mm.
like it was just like this whole sci-fi phase that I was going on to. But I know the exact point that you're talking about where you discover the continuity is like where shit, what's his name? You just mentioned him.
The new Oliver.
Yeah, yeah. I remember reading that. I was like, oh no.
Mm.
Yeah, it was also because like I think was I already done with the book? I can't remember if like it tied up as neatly for me as for you. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
or whether or not it was when I went back to the robot books, I was like, oh wait, I know this character. Um
Yep.
yeah, so yeah, I totally feel you.
Yeah.
Unfortunately I did not have the compulsion. Like it wasn't 15 extra books for me within a very short amount of time. Let's just put it that way. It was over like many, many more years than that.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. If you're aware of the robot series at first, it's a lot of it, especially the first book, I Robot, takes place in the 21st century, the late 21st century.
Yep.
The Empire series takes place in the 37th century,
Hmm.
at 37th, 38th, and 39th century. The Foundation series takes place 5,000 years after that.
Yep.
The idea that these universes are connected is insane to me, but it makes sense like, once I've read all the books.
Hmm. Hmm.
Also, the Empire series fills in a huge, like, 3,000 year gap between the 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 Foundation series and the Robot series,
Yep.
which is important in the grand scheme of things. Because when I was reading the Empire series, a lot of it takes place on Trantor,
Uh-huh.
which is the main seat of power of the Galactic Empire in the Foundation series.
Yep.
But at that point in the Empire series, it was just a minor power in the galaxy.
Yep.
The Robot series was great, though. I mean, some of the best books that Isaac Asimov has ever written were in the Robot series. I
Yeah.
think the Positronic Man is it was adapted into a Robin Williams film, but I think like the Positronic Man or the
Yep.
Bicentennial Man
Yeah.
is the best story that Isaac Asimov has ever written, primarily because it's character driven. You know
Hmm.
how I like characters.
Yeah.
So Andrew Martin as a character was probably the most fleshed out character that he's ever written, and that
For
was
sure.
very, very good.
For sure.
The rest of it is more broad based sociology, psychology,
Hmm.
and politics,
Hmm.
which I don't mind. I really, really liked it. And I lead more towards Isaac Asimov's view of science and rationality
Ooh.
as the fixing of the universe,
Yeah.
more so than Herbert's view.
Hmm.
So I don't mean to support the Benny Gesserit, but I kind of do.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I support the Foundation, so yeah, there you go.
Totally
If you're
understand.
interested in
Mm.
if you're interested in these books, begin with I Robot
Oh
first.
yeah. I was just
Yeah,
about to
begin
say.
with I Robot. Yeah, it comprises of 9 short stories about the robot set in the 21st century, because that's the building block for all the later books,
Yep.
and then follow up with Positronic Man, and then and then not watch, sorry, and then read a novel called Nemesis, which is outside of all 3 series,
Yep.
but it's also inside the universe.
Yep.
And then you get into the Neil Oliver books set in the 35th century: The Case of Steel, The Naked Sun, The Robots of Dawn, and then Robots and Empire,
Mm-hmm.
which ties into the three Empire books, which
Mm-hmm.
then tie into the Foundation books. It's a lot of work and it's very cool. But it is a lot of work,
Oh
lah.
yeah.
Right at the end of it, there is a book called The End of Eternity,
uh,
which is a 1955 book about. If you watch Loki, it's basically about a
yeah.
TVA, and it's a story about how the Foundation universe came into being as the only universe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also very interesting. It's not necessary that you read the End of
For
Eternity,
sure.
but it's just like a nice multiversal book that explains why there is no multiverse in the Foundation stories and
Yeah.
no aliens as well, because the quote unquote TVA, in the books it's called Eternity lah, but
Yeah.
like the TVA has chosen a particular sacred timeline, shall we say, for this to go on lah, which is the Foundation timeline.
Yeah.
Interesting, far-reaching, sprawling. Some of the best and most innovative fiction concepts I've ever read came from Isaac Asimov.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know until I read up more of it that Isaac Asimov was the first writer to invent the term galactic empire, the
Yep.
concept of it.
Yep.
I found that it must have been groundbreaking, and it was, because without it there's no Star Wars and there's no Dune and all of that. I will talk a little bit more about the Foundation TV show in the next episode of Genre Equality, but I will say that the Foundation TV show, besides the basic premise, has almost no resemblance to Foundation at all. So if you want to get the true Foundation experience, read the Foundation novels. um yeah, that's my mini review of Isaac Asimov's Robot Empire slash Foundation
Oh.
Universe. Do you want to add in anything before we end
No,
the
no.
show?
I think you pretty much covered everything. I think like uh having a direction to go when tackling something of that kind of magnitude with that many books is really,
Mhm.
really helpful to just but definitely start with iRobot for sure.
Yeah, yeah. iRobot sets you up with the basic ground rules, without which you won't understand the coming robot books, because so much of it is about the three laws,
Yep.
and the understanding of that. It's very cool. Like Foundation and Earth. I mean, there was even before the new Oliver came onto the scene.
Uh-huh.
They visited forgotten planets that had been abandoned a long time ago. So they visited stuff like Aurora
Yep.
and planets that you found in the Oliver series. And at first I was like, okay, maybe Solaria and Aurora are like common names that he's just using again. And then you're
Yeah.
like, oh fuck, these are the actual planets that Oliver was on. I was like, oh god damn it, I gotta read again. And
Yeah.
don't get to that point. So read the robot books first,
Yes,
read the
yes.
Empire books first, and then read the Foundation books. It's worth your time. It's a lot of work, but it's worth your time. Take
Yep.
your time to it. You don't have to run through it in 3 weeks like I did. Take 3 years if you want to,
Yep.
but I will say it is worth it. And that's it for this episode of Genre Equality. We will be back covering film noir
Mm-hmm.
and Asian horror in 2 episodes of Behold in the coming month, as well as Genre Equality 47, which will be coming a month from now.
Yep.
A lot of cool things to talk about there as well, because What We Do in the Shadows will
Oh
be ending
yeah.
its third season. The premiere season of What If has been an uneven ride, but let's talk about that too.
Yep. Yep.
Venom 2 is going to be out in the cinema soon. Let There Be Carnage. Woody Harrelson as Cletus Cassidy. Um, we didn't have the highest opinion on Venom 1, but we did think it was entertaining at
Yeah.
the very least.
Mm-hmm.
You know, of course, I'll talk about Foundation. I'll talk about the newest Halloween movie, Halloween Kills. I thought we'll be talking about Violet Evergarden, the movie,
Oh yeah.
and lots more, man. What are you most excited to talk about next month?
Uh, I've already Violet Evergarden for sure. I'm a big
Yep.
fan. I still think it's severely underrated. And people are
Mm-hmm.
sleeping on it, for
Yep.
sure. Injustice is also coming out. Yeah,
It's a DC animated one, yeah.
yeah. I'm interested to see how they're gonna do Injustice this time around. I've seen some of the stills.
Mm-hmm.
Looks interesting. Like the artwork looks pretty great. For
Yep.
that and yeah, what we do in the shadows. I have not caught up yet, so I'm excited
Sweet.
to do that. The first two seasons have been a kind of a wild ride. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I mean, it's one of those like series that the premise may get tired after a while, but
Mm-hmm.
it hasn't yet. So I'm curious to see how they continue to keep it up. But yeah, that's
That's it.
essentially it. I've got a lot of like things to pick your brain about what if, I think, as well.
Sure.
Just the like where it stands in the MCU as just kind of a product, right? And what it means for what they're trying to do within the MCU itself.
Yeah.
So we'll discuss all of that at the next genre equality um episode 47.
Definitely, man. Till then, please remember to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We're available on Mixcloud, which is our traditional home as
Yep.
well. Everywhere you can find a podcast, you will find Genre Equality and our sister show, Behold. So give us a like and follow. It really helps with the algorithm, and it helps other people find our podcast.
Yeah.
Till then, this has been Hidzir.
Hi, Maisa.
Goodbye, guys.
Ciao.